This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Any successful movement makes us feel something and gets us excited to get involved. As designers, we have a huge opportunity to create a brand that community really truly can take on as their own and that people want to rally behind. Today we're creating a full brand identity for a movement called Shift Gears, all about creating more bike-friendly cities. So come along as we do research, create mood boards, put together a logo design, full visual identity, and even apply it to social media, posters, everything you can imagine. We're even exploring typography and custom illustrations. When you create for a movement, you want everyone who's involved to feel ownership of that final brand. I think that's true for any brand, but when you're working with a charity or a movement, there's usually a stream of people coming in to work on impromptu campaigns or painting signs or volunteering in some sort of way. So you want that brand to be super quick and easy to adapt as their own and take on in any situation. This means we want to create a system that is really resilient to interpretation. To be able to design that kind of system, we need to really immerse ourselves into the day-to-day of the movement. For example, one of the earliest organizations that Jeremy and I worked with was a charity that helps to repurpose fabric that would have been otherwise thrown away. They had so many different talented people who came in and sewed and worked on different projects. And one of the things that they said right away early on in the project was that they wanted the logo icon to be simple enough for them to be able to embroider. That became something that created this whole modular system and something that was really easy to create from just a few individual pieces. Little takeaways like this make all the difference when you start handing over that brand. In this case, we're creating for a fictional company, so instead of interviewing or talking to people directly, we're going to do a little desktop research. My very first step is to try to find forums, social media accounts, blogs, and other places where I can read about the type of work that the organization could be doing, and looking for people's feedback in terms of what they find difficult, what they find important, and what they find challenging. As I'm going through, I'm making little notes of ideas that I have or thoughts that I think could be interesting to explore, so that once we actually start putting pen to paper, it's not as intimidating. Some of the most common themes I'm seeing here are, first of all, sustainability. So being able to reduce emissions, have less air pollution, less noise pollution, for example, for birds and other animals from cars. We also have the health side of being able to move more, for the mental health side of coming out and meeting people and seeing nature and doing other activities like that. And even economic benefits of people using their bikes to access different parts of the city, bringing a little bit more business to those small shops that are normally not being a pit stop when you have a car. If you feel a little bit unsure how to go about this first research portion, a great inspirational company is called IDEO. They use a system called design thinking that you might have heard about before, and you're really immersing yourself in the community. And they've used this to create brands for different movements and even products like Barbie's dollhouse. One of the most important things for this project, and in my opinion for any design project, is to actually learn about the community that you're creating for, not just guess what they would like. Now that we know a little bit more about what's important to this community, we can start looking at some visual inspiration to see how other brands are approaching this. I think a great place to start is other bike movements, charities, and generally very dynamic brands. We just posted an entire video all about dynamic branding, so I'll make sure to put that down in the description if you want to check that out. One thing that I think charities are doing really well is the sense of ownership over the brand. For example, by using handwritten fonts or by using the logo as a kind of window into different photography or different scenarios. I also like how we have a lot of colors and bold design. There's not a lot of minimalism here. I think this is quite a smart move because we want people to get really excited about this movement, and we also want to create a lot of contrast against that concrete of the city. Putting up really colorful posters or maybe even painting the street as a way to get new people involved and excited could be a really smart move. As I'm going through the inspiration, I'm just saving anything that makes me smile or makes me feel something. I use a tool called Milanote, and they have an extension so you can save images straight from the different websites, so you don't actually have to save them on your computer. And I also like to write little notes about why I saved a specific image, because if you're anything like me, it can be really hard to remember the exact reason you saved an image once you have like 50 on the board and it's 5 days later. I'm already starting to have some ideas. I really like the thought of being able to have the bike lanes open up new parts of the city. Maybe we can represent that through colors or illustrations or a layout somehow. I like the idea of these maps from above, but I also feel like it's almost a little bit too distant, especially for a logo concept. I want to create something that makes you feel like you're part of it and you're there on the street. I think one aspect of design that I particularly like is being able to help people visualize something that they just haven't experienced before. If you haven't grown up or lived in a city where bike lanes are everywhere, then it can be kind of hard to imagine how it would actually function or how it would impact your life. I think a smart way to convey this could be to use illustration and illustrate directly on top of photography. This means that we can bring in that color, we can make things a bit more tangible, and we can combine it with real life scenarios. To take this a step further, I would even like to combine illustration with typography. There are so many talented creatives who dedicate their entire careers to working on type specifically. There's of course so much value in going to places like Adobe Typekit or Google Fonts, but there is something specific about going to individual foundries and looking at these beautifully crafted different typefaces. One of my favorite places to visit is the site called VJ Type, and they have these stunning different typefaces with so much character. They have this one typeface called Kako, and I've been keeping my eyes on this and looking for a project to use it in, and I think this could be a great opportunity. I really like how it has these really big, bold areas connected by these smaller parts, and I think that could be a great analogy for the bike paths connecting different parts of the city. My idea is to use these big capital letters from this alphabet and illustrate on top of them as if the bits inside of the letter are actually being transformed by bike lanes and the pieces outside are not. Let's go and see how that could work in practice and get sketching. To create something like this, it's the perfect opportunity to practice your illustration and typography skills a little. And that is where today's sponsor Skillshare comes in. You know I love both teaching and learning on Skillshare. And some of my favorite classes recently have been Composition for Illustrators by Tom Froese, which explores how to create unique and captivating illustrations using a 2D style, and Dee Oud's class on typography for beautiful matchbox labels. Even if you're not an experienced illustrator, these classes are so visually stunning and lovely put together that you can get so much inspiration for any of your projects. Plus, it's a great way to stay inspired and keep that creative spark. And if you want to learn something completely different, Skillshare is the largest online learning community with thousands of classes on topics like productivity, starting your own business, and logo design, and so much more. To help you get started, Skillshare is offering the first 500 people to use our link a 30-day free trial to Skillshare, so you can try out these or any other classes. You can also check out the projects tab to see how other creatives are approaching each class, and of course create your own. I'm using Procreate on my iPad to start creating some of those initial sketches, and I've imported some of the letters as images so I can have them as a reference in the background. At this point, we haven't actually established a color palette for this brand, so I'm just looking at coming up with the overall style. Now we are finally ready to start working on the logo. In some cases, I might have an idea right after speaking to the client, and in some cases, I tackle other parts of the visual language first. There is absolutely no right or wrong way to do it, so I wanted to show you that sometimes you can just start where you feel really inspired and see where the branding project leads you. My very first ideas going into the logo sketching process was to work on combining the S and the G, since that's the two first letters in shift gears. And this is a way we can create a monogram. Because there's a lot of curves in both of these letters, I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities creating different paths, like in bike paths, or connecting the community. I also like the idea of having a quite chunky icon that can work as that window for different illustrations or different photography. For that to work, I'm kind of taking an opposite approach where the roads are the negative space in this sketch. Sometimes you feel really strongly about a certain idea, but it can be really hard to know how it's going to work unless you actually start putting it into practice and testing it out. My best tip is to continue to create more and more sketches so that you have tons to choose from when you actually start refining them. We actually made a video where we created 100 sketches before we actually started narrowing it down, so I'll make sure to link that down in the description if you want to go check it out. I ended up really liking these 5 versions, so I'm gonna drop them into Adobe Illustrator and start creating vector versions so we can actually have a play around. Right away, I think these two ideas are feeling a little bit too harsh and not giving that flexible feeling that we're after. Now, I had such a hard time choosing between these two ideas. On the one hand, I love how dynamic this mark feels, and it has that subtle hint to the shape of the S and the G. The lines felt a bit too round and I wanted a bit more crispness from the sides, so we're doing some experimentation here. On the other hand, I just love how chunky and playful this icon feels. I could totally see it work as like a badge, and I think it would work really well in small format, or even blown up as a giant poster when you got a cutout photography, for example. Even at this point of the process, I wasn't fully sure which one to go with, and that's totally okay. You just have to try your way through it. Be patient and make sure you have lots of time for this part. And if I was sharing this with a client, because I typically present more than one concept, I might even show both and let them choose. What finally tipped the scale for me was trying them out as social media icons. I think they both look really nice and I can see this option going out of the page. But in the end, I just think this chunky icon just feels a little bit more like a movement or a charity mark. Let me know down in the comments which one you would have gone with and which one's your favorite. Now that we have our illustration style, our typography, our logo design, let's tie it all together with the right colors and a word mark. To customize the type, I'm starting with a friendly and modern typeface, and then I'm mimicking that negative space that we have in the icon in a really subtle way. We really want to be restrained here because we don't want to compromise the readability or make it feel too gimmicky. So we want to have a think about where we're placing customizations. So we don't need to do it for every single letter. We can have a look and make sure it feels balanced throughout the mark. And we also need to think about how that works when it's stacked, because if you have customizations that then start to align on top of each other, that could be a bit of an issue. If you have repeating letters, like let's say 2 different O's, you might want to make sure that those look the same, unless you have a very specific reason for not doing that. For colors, I want to have something that has a lot of contrast and color, and I think going with something a little bit more natural feeling for that sustainability aspect is a smart move. So I'm going to have a really rich, a little bit darker green color, and then combine that with a powder blue kind of chicory flower color. That's a really nice contrast, and we can then bring in more poppy colors, like having, for example, a more colorful green, having a yellow or a pink accent, for example. A quick tip for picking color palettes that work every single time is to have one dark and one light color for background colors, and then at least one more bright color that you can use as either your main brand color or as accent colors. If you feel a little bit unsure which color versions would work together, you can always use a contrast checker to actually see if it's accessible or not. With these colors picked out, I'm gonna go back in and finish off the illustrations. I like to block out the different colors before I actually start implementing them. It just saves tons of time because you can actually spot things that could be an issue before you actually spend all that time coloring. With branding, even though we have these set brand colors, for illustrations specifically, I like to give myself the flexibility of using multiple shades of those colors, just so we can create a little bit more depth in the illustration. Finally, let's put together some really fun posters and marketing materials for the brand. I think this is such an underrated part of the branding project. You might feel a little bit tired, you've used all your creative energy to come up with these ideas, but before you present it to a client, enjoy this part. You've come up with the hard part. Now you can put all your effort into really doing your work justice with these beautiful mockups that you put together. Since we did all that research in the beginning, we can really pick our mockups with purpose so that they will truly represent what that brand will actually look like in the end. For everyone to be able to quickly adopt this brand and understand how to use it, I like to create a brand guide and a style sheet, but I also like to create templates for everything, like social media posts or pitch decks, for example. I like to use a tool like Canva or Adobe Express, for example, where you can set up the template and all your client has to do is just drag in another image, update the text a little, and they're ready to post. A last little detail I like to add is some instructions on how to use this logo in a more dynamic way, like giving examples of how it can work if you want to use it for a pride parade or if you partner with another organization. I hope this gave you tons of inspiration to create for a movement that you really believe in, either as a paid designer or even as a volunteer. And if there's something you really want to learn more about, don't forget to use our link to try Skillshare for free for 30 days. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck with your projects and see you next time.